pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, First Sergeant Gragg of Long Island. He has 16 years in service and promises many more. And I told him we were happy to hear about some of his experiences in these 16 years. First Sergeant, it's all yours.
Thank you.
Please welcome.
So, before I start, I just want to let you know it's going to be really difficult for me to stand behind this. I normally walk around and talk, but I'll try today. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak here on the 66th anniversary of the Korean War Armistice. Veterans of the Korean War and the families, thank you for your service and dedication to freedom. We stand here today in honor of you. I don't have to go through a quick history or a quick timeline of events because the majority of you, I can tell, were either there or you grew up in it or knew about it. But World War II ended in the fall of 1945. But what was unknown to most was that North Korea and South Korea were still fighting at times, even though that World War II ended. 10,000 plus troops between North Korea and South Korea were still fighting on the border before the Korean War even began. The Korean War began on the 25th of June in 1950, when the Korean Army in the morning crossed over the 38th parallel, which was divided and created by, not by the Koreans, but between America and the Soviet Union at the time. As we all know, the Soviet Union was supporting the North while the United States was supporting the South, as we still do today. On the morning of the 25th, over 10,000 plus people crossed over the border and attacked into the South. But with all that being said, we only fought for approximately a little bit over a year, where in July of 1951, peace talks started, but it did not occur for another 2 more years after that, where we found peace and created the Armistice as of today, 66 years ago. But one of the biggest things that's unknown to most, and what we've learned from the Korean War as a whole, is that 70% of the population, from a civilian populace, actually took the brunt of the war. Not necessarily soldiers, not necessarily the Marines or the Air Force or the sailors, but the civilian populace in South Korea took a good chunk out of the community and devastated the country for years to come. But what makes this war so significant in the United States? What makes this war so significant in Korea? Well, some will say that this prevented World War III. Some would also say this is also the first conflict of the Cold War. But with all that being said, the United States learned a valuable lesson during its evolution. So after World War II, the United States went quiet for a while and weren't training their Marines or their soldiers at a pace what was considered to be real time, or let's recreate reality in case we do have to fight again. So a lot of the personnel that found their way into Korea in the early 1950s weren't ready for war. They were young. They were just coming out of high school. Some joined, and 2-3 months later they were overseas. A significant amount of people's lives were taken, not because of war itself, but just because they weren't trained properly. They just weren't there. So from this point forward, from that war itself, America learned a valuable lesson, and so did the Koreans, which was never allow yourself to rest. Never allow your guard to go down, because you never know what might happen. You never know what could occur. But one of the things that we never talk about when it comes to war is what happens after war, right? So after war, one of the things we never mention is the devastation that still lies. Because what happens for America a lot of times is we get to just go home. We kind of just travel back to where we come from, but that wasn't the case for the Koreans. South Korea was left devastated to include fear of not knowing if North Korea would ever cross back over, because a substantial amount of the United Nations that were there in support were gone. They went home. They went back to their place of residence. But for South Korea, what they were dealing with was they were dealing with poverty. In the 1950s and including into the early 1960s, poverty was key, was high. They were only looking at about $100 per capita for South Korea as a whole. But that didn't last long. By the early 1970s, South Korea had moved into about $1,500 per capita. One of the things that started in 1966 with President John F. Kennedy was a thing what we still know today as the Peace Corps. About 2,000 plus volunteers in the form of teachers and representatives of American society entered South Korea, and they stayed there from 1966 until 1981. A substantial amount of those individuals went back to the United States and became representatives within the government. good amount of those people continue to push forward and support the South Koreans as they continue to develop. But the stake of South Korea, the biggest light to South Korea when they entered the international community was the Olympics in Seoul in 1988. That was a key marking in the history of South Korea to let them know that they're fortunate to be recognized and they cannot be forgotten. That they have to be understood and saw within the international community. And they did that. So in the 1990s, they were considered part of the international community and became the 4th largest in Asia and the largest in the world when it comes to their economics. Now South Korea today has the 2nd largest volunteer program in the world behind the Peace Corps. They operate in 40 different countries right now on top of supporting the United States within their Peace Corps. The bond between South Korea and the United States has been continuous since 1948 and it won't change. Today, it's almost unheard from any service member not to have served in Korea. Next to one of their ROK sister services, or served one of them in combat. I've had the privilege of serving next to ROK Marines in Iraq, and I can tell you, they serve honorably and with admirable respect. He just came from Japan, my corporal here, and I know he could say the same thing. There's not a service in the United States, from the Air Force, the Navy, Marine Corps, the Army, that can't say anything different when it comes to any ROK services that are out there today. We share as Marines with the ROK Marines a very sacred meaning. Once a Marine, always a Marine. And when you see a ROK Marine, one of the first things that we do is we take the shirts off of our back, especially if it represents our unit. And we take that shirt and we exchange. That's one of the first immediate things. I can't tell you how many ROK Marine shirts I have in my closet. It's just a thing. It's what we do. And we did this in combat. And I can tell you, I spent many nights underneath the stars in Iraq in the desert, sleeping in sand, not too far away, arms reaching length from touching a ROK Marine. I can tell you, I would be extremely comfortable today if I had to deploy with a ROK Marine or any ROK service. I'd be extremely comfortable today. I've served with many services around the world for the last 16 years, and I can tell you I've seen many, but there's only a few that I would ever say that I would be comfortable to look to my left and look to my right, knowing that if I'm going to go forward, that if it was a ROK Marine or a Royal Marine from England, I can guarantee you that we'll be okay. I say all this today to say that the bond between South Korea and the United States has lasted for over 66 years, and it will continue to last for another 66 years, if not centuries, to come forward. I want to thank everyone for coming out today and allowing me to speak. I want to thank Mr. Lee, Mr. Henry, and Mr. Kim for allowing me the opportunity to be the keynote speaker today, and I'm honored and will be forever appreciative. Thank you all for today, and I can guarantee you that between South Korea and the United States, this bond will never end. Thank you.